not true, but it should be. Like most of you, I grew up in the company of heroes. When I was a boy, I realized there was something special about my childhood. I couldn't put it into words, but I felt it with all my heart. And I knew that I was growing up in the company of heroes. And I saw them everywhere. At church, at school, in the hardware store, at restaurants, when I went to sporting events, family reunions, the neighbor's house. They were my father's friends, my doctors, my bosses, my uncles, my dad. They were the veterans of World War II. And to me, they were all heroes. Now, I believe you can say that about any group of American veterans from any era. But those World War II veterans always had a special hold on my heart. No Americans of any era faced greater challenges, shouldered greater responsibilities, were willing to take greater risks, all for what was right. Whether they were the few who saw combat or the many others who also made victory possible, they were all heroes to me. Those veterans of World War II made me grateful for veterans of all eras. Long before I ever heard the phrase greatest generation, I believe they were. Even as a boy, I knew that I was blessed to be living in the company of heroes. And I always tried to learn from them. Over the years, as a historian, I've had the privilege of interviewing many of them. And I'd like to briefly share with you some of what I've learned from them. 5 lessons in leadership from the greatest generation. Lesson in leadership number 1. Real leaders always take care of their people. Almost 2,700 servicemen learned that lesson one afternoon in 1942 while they were prisoners of war. And the man who taught it to them was a fellow prisoner, a 34-year-old American naval officer, Commander Richard N. Antrim. Even before he found himself in a Japanese prison camp, Dick Antrim was taking care of his people. In early 1942, he was the executive officer of the USS Pope, a Navy destroyer that was sunk by Japanese aircraft at the Second Battle of Java Sea. Even though he was wounded, Antrim managed to keep 150 crew members from his ship alive in the water for 3 days. It was a valiant effort, and it saved lives. But Commander Antrim and his sailors were captured by a Japanese warship and taken to a deadly Japanese prison camp in Indonesia. The Imperial Japan of World War II was not the Japan we know today. American prisoners of war were routinely starved, often beaten, frequently tortured, sometimes executed for little or no reason. Captured officers who protested or who even asked a question were sometimes banned. In Commander Dick Antrim's prison camp one day in 1942, a young American POW forgot to bow when he passed a Japanese guard. His sentence, 50 lashes with a whip. The American POWs watched in helpless frustration while their fellow prisoner was savagely beaten. 1 lash, 2, 3, 4. The POWs could do nothing to stop it. 5 lashes, 6, 7. Anyone who even spoke up could be executed. 8 lashes, 9. The victim was near unconscious, and the POWs were near mutiny. And then Dick Antrim stepped forward. He knew what would happen. He could be bayoneted or even beheaded, but he acted anyway. He calmly stepped forward and asked if he could take the rest of the prisoner's punishment. The Japanese guards were stunned. They weren't accustomed to officers showing such concern for their friends. That wasn't the way of a military dictatorship. In amazement, they looked at each other. They looked down at the beaten prisoner. They looked back at Dick Antrim, and then they turned and walked away. The POW was saved. His fellow POWs were inspired, and Dick Antrim was later awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Commander Richard Antrim, he made a positive difference in the lives of 2,700 American prisoners of war because he understood a key lesson in leadership. Real leaders always take care of their people. Lesson in leadership number 2. Real leaders always take responsibility. At 10 p.m. on the eve of D-Day, June 6, 1944, American paratroopers of the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions were lined up on airstrips in southern Britain, waiting for the order to board their aircraft. The Allied invasion of France was finally underway. In a few hours, in the early morning darkness of D-Day, they would parachute from their aircraft or land in gliders behind German lines in Normandy. Just before they received the order to take to the skies, some of them got a visit from General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower was the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe, the mastermind of D-Day, and the man who was sending thousands of young Americans in uniform into harm's way. Generals didn't usually chat with privates, but Eisenhower did. He walked among the ranks of paratroopers, talking to the young soldiers, asking them where they were from, joking about fishing and baseball, talking with them about the America they all loved, the country they were willing to die for. He was trying to encourage them, but typical of the greatest generation, they encouraged him. "Quit worrying, General," one soldier told him. "We'll take care of this thing for you." Soon afterwards, the young paratroopers were in the dark skies over Normandy. Some were shot out of the sky when they parachuted down. Others landed in water and, weighed down by equipment, they drowned. Many perished when their gliders skidded across fields the Germans had flooded and crashed into hedgerow fences. But most made it and captured the key objectives, holding crossroads and bridges for the main Allied force, which was scheduled to land on Normandy's beaches. The Allied landings occurred at dawn as planned. Troops poured ashore, broke through the German defenses, and pushed inland from 4 of the 5 Allied beaches, from Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword. But the D-Day invasion slammed to a halt on one beach, the one that was codenamed Omaha, the one that would become known as Bloody Omaha. There, the beachside bluffs were high, the defenses were strong, the German troops were tough, and the first 2 waves of American troops were slaughtered in many places. Hour after hour passed with no breakthrough. And if the American troops could not secure Omaha, it seemed possible that the entire invasion might fail. Surely, if that had occurred, it would not have been the fault of General Eisenhower's. His planning and coordination of the largest amphibious assault in history had been brilliant. If D-Day failed, surely the blame would not have been placed on him. But Eisenhower thought differently. Only his closest advisors knew that when the D-Day landings began, back at Eisenhower's headquarters was a secret message that he had written before the invasion began. It was supposed to be released to the public if the D-Day landings were a failure. In it, Eisenhower explained very humbly that no blame should be placed on the American armed forces under his command. Instead, as the Supreme Allied Commander, he and he alone was responsible for any failure. D-Day did not fail, of course. The American soldiers on Bloody Omaha finally broke through the German defenses, and the Allied landing force successfully linked with the paratroopers. Eisenhower's secret statement was never publicly read. Less than 1 year after D-Day, Nazi forces in Germany had surrendered, and victory in Europe was being celebrated by Americans everywhere. And as for General Eisenhower, within a few years he would become President Eisenhower, due largely to his successful leadership as the Spring Allied commander. Because Dwight D. Eisenhower knew real leaders always take responsibility. Lesson in leadership number 3. Real leaders don't give up easily. They persevere. Now, don't feel uninformed if you've never heard of Elaine Wright. She wasn't famous. She didn't go to war. She wasn't even in the military. But Elaine Wright was a member of the greatest generation, and she was a real leader. During World War II, she was a civilian volunteer at the USO Canteen in North Platte, Nebraska. The USO was a private, nonprofit agency that brought entertainment to Americans in uniform. It was famous for staging performances for the American Armed Forces, some 400,000 performances in World War II. But the USO's most popular contribution to the war effort was the USO Canteen. Canteens were set up in churches, storefronts, and railway stations, and they gave young Americans in uniform who were far from home little things that meant a lot. A hot cup of coffee, a cold sandwich, a warm smile. North Platte, Nebraska was just a little prairie farming community, but lots of troop trains stopped there to take on water. And Elaine Wright and the other women volunteers there wanted to do their part. So every day they made and passed out sandwiches, donuts, and coffee to soldiers, sailors, and Marines from daylight until the last train left. Elaine Wright was a middle-aged mom. Her husband worked for the railroad. They had one grown son who had joined the Army and gone off to war. So when Elaine Wright served those young men in uniform at the North Platte Canteen, she thought about her son, and she hoped that somewhere someone was helping him. Then one day, she didn't show up at the canteen as usual. The other volunteers thought that was odd. Elaine was so dependable. And then they heard the news. Elaine's son had been killed in action. Nobody would have been critical if Elaine had never come back to work at the canteen as a volunteer. She had done more than her share. But a few days later, there she was, handing out sandwiches, donuts, and coffee. I can't help my son, she said, but I can help someone else's son. And so she continued to work at the North Platte Canteen day after day. The government didn't pay Elaine and the other volunteers at the North Platte USO or even pay for the food and drink they prepared and gave away. But by war's end, Elaine Wright and the other volunteers at the little USO Canteen in North Platte, Nebraska had served more than 6 million Americans in uniform. And for generations to come, Elaine Wright of the North Platte USO Canteen will personify the tremendous contribution of American civilians in World War II, because she understood that real leaders don't give up easily, they persevere. Lesson in leadership number 4. Real leaders do the right thing. 22-year-old Desmond Doss was willing to go to war. He just didn't want to take a weapon. Doss was a mountain boy, a hillbilly from the Blue Ridge country of Virginia. He was also a devout Christian, and while most Christians believe they had a biblical right to self-defense in a just war, especially fighting the evils of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, Desmond Doss believed that he could not in good conscience take a human life, and so he became a conscientious objector. It was a title that Doss did not like. He did not object to serving his country in uniform, he explained. He just didn't want to kill anybody. Therefore, he considered himself to be a conscientious cooperator. When he got his draft notice, he was working in a shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia, which meant he qualified for a draft exemption, but he didn't take it. Instead, he went into the Army as a conscientious objector and asked to serve as a combat medic. And he did. in the U.S. Army's 77th Infantry Division. Why? Because he thought it was the right thing to do. I felt like it was an honor to serve God and my country according to the dictates of my conscience, he said later. Some of his fellow soldiers, however, didn't see it that way. They considered conscientious objectors to be draft dodgers, and they constantly harassed and ridiculed Doss until they reached the combat zone in the Pacific. There the hazing stopped. Why? Because when others ran to the rear, Desmond Doss ran to the front. His bravery became legendary. When the fighting began, it was said, Desmond Doss would grab his medic's kit and head to the sound of the guns. In April of 1945, the 77th Infantry Division was engaged in the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War, the Battle of Okinawa. The division was ordered to drive the Japanese from a 40-foot-high plateau called Hacksaw Ridge. Other American troops had tried to capture it and could not, and in their first attempt, the troops of Doss's division also failed. Japanese artillery, mortars, machine gun fire turned the plateau into a slaughter camp. It was littered with American casualties, including countless wounded Americans who were left lying on the plateau under Japanese fire. Someone had to rescue them, but there was only one medic available, Desmond Doss. Off he went, and he was looking up at the plateau, Hacksaw Ridge. Just to reach it, he had to scale a 40-foot-high cliff, and then he somehow had to get the wounded back down to safety. It seemed impossible. But he somehow made it to the top, and there he found the plateau carpeted with American wounded. How could one man help so many? How could he even get them back down the cliff? It looked hopeless. But to Desmond Doss, it was just a question of doing the right thing. So he hooked a makeshift harness to a scraggly tree on the side of the cliff, and he used that to lower the wounded to safety. But he could only lower one man at a time. And so that's what he did. He focused on saving one man, just one. And then he would focus on another, and another, and another. I just kept praying, he said later. Lord, help me get just one more. And he did. In an amazing, miraculous feat, Desmond Doss treated and dragged one wounded soldier after another across that bloody plateau, then lowered them down the cliff to safety on his rigged-up harness, one soldier at a time, until he rescued every wounded soldier on Hacksaw Ridge. Afterwards, Army investigators were sent to examine this extraordinary rescue, and they concluded that Desmond Doss, the conscientious cooperator, had rescued no less than 75 wounded American soldiers from Hacksaw Ridge, one at a time. And some said the number was over 100. All saved because Desmond Doss wanted to do the right thing. And the soldiers who had once ridiculed him, well, never again did that. The soldiers who served with Doss showed how they felt about him when he was wounded on Okinawa, twice. He was hit once by shrapnel from enemy artillery, and then was hurt again when he rolled off his stretcher so another soldier could use it. Every man in Doss's battalion wanted to know what had happened to their courageous medic. Finally, word came back from the field hospital. Despite his wounds, Doss was going to be okay, but he was very upset because he had lost his pocket Bible somewhere on the battlefield. When they heard that, an entire battalion of American soldiers dropped everything they were doing and picked over the battlefield until they found Doss's little Bible, which they sent to him. That's how they felt about Desmond Doss, the only conscientious objector of World War II to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor, and the only conscientious cooperator to ever do so. Desmond Doss personified lesson in leadership number 4. Real leaders do do the right thing. Finally, lesson in leadership number 5. Real leaders lead by example. The young lieutenant did not look anything like John Wayne. He was a soft-spoken 22-year-old from rural Pennsylvania, quiet, humble, devout, not a boaster, not a bossy type, but he had the makings of a true leader. And his superiors saw it right away. He was selected for officers' candidate school, did well there in his quiet, wise, and responsible way. Troops always seemed motivated to try harder whenever he was leading them. So he was promoted from lieutenant to captain. What was it about this humble young officer that so inspired the troops he led? Well, 1, he took care of his people, and his men were better for it. 2, he was willing to take responsibility when things went wrong, and his men respected him for it. 3, he persevered under hardship, and so his men did too. He did the right thing, and so his men trusted and respected him. And 5th, he led by example. When other officers were off in town on a weekend pass, he was often found leading new recruits on a field march. Why? Because he believed it was his duty to do it if they had to. He understood that the most effective leadership, real leadership, comes from setting the right example. He didn't shirk the hard duty, the dirty work, the jobs nobody wanted, and he didn't complain. Because he wanted to lead by example. And he did. He set an example of genuine character, personal faith, and duty done well. It was the most powerful kind of leadership model anyone could give or receive. It was real leadership, leadership by example. He rose from lieutenant to captain to major. He was the officer that soldiers wanted to follow. He led them into Normandy on D-Day, parachuting into enemy territory with the 101st Airborne. When he drew a deadly assignment to knock out a German artillery battery firing on Utah Beach, his soldiers followed him without question. And his leadership example paid off. He and his men took out 4 deadly German guns, 12 men against more than 60. And they did so with such teamwork and efficiency, and with so little loss of American life, that the assault at Breakport Manor, which is what it became known as, became a West Point classroom lesson in leadership for more than 50 years. He was eventually promoted to battalion commander, still leading by example, but leading larger numbers of American troops. He led them through Operation Market Garden in Holland, through the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium, into Germany, and on until the end of the war in Europe. He proved himself to be a leader who truly led by example. Outside of his battalion, however, no one knew about his extraordinary model of leadership. But the men who had followed him through harm's way knew about it, and they never forgot it. In the decades to come, those aging paratroopers from Easy Company, that band of brothers from the 101st Airborne's 506 Parachute Infantry Division, would remember him with respect and affection because of his personal example of leadership. And long after the war ended, when a famous historian interviewed them about their heroic and bloody odyssey through World War II, all of them mentioned the man who led by example, Major Richard Winters, Dick Winters. The story became a best-selling book, Band of Brothers, by Stephen Ambrose. And so the world learned of Dick Winters, who came to represent the best of the greatest generation. A man of character, faith, and duty. A true leader who understood the ultimate lesson in leadership. Real leaders lead by example. 5 lessons in leadership from the greatest generation. 1, real leaders always take care of their people. 2, real leaders always take responsibility. 3, real leaders don't give up easily, they persevere. 4, real leaders do the right thing. And 5, Real leaders lead by example. Lessons in leadership from the greatest generation. They'll still work today if only we follow them. Thank you very much.